All right.
Okay, so right as we come to this recording, we've been having a fun discussion where we've been reminiscing about the successes and failures of the past, and and it's basically because, and this is very fitting for a discussion about the moon. It's because we have come full circle. We've come full circle because this was the subject of the very first Zoom class that I ever did. And I posted, I had a bunch of people, including Layla Akbar, who's with me right now, who were in my astrology study. I had put an ad in asking for people to join my astrology study, and then decided to start a weekly class. And I would use the charts from the astrology study to confirm what I was seeing, and also to use as sample charts, etc. And we did that all through the 146 consideration series, the Benatis. That worked out beautifully, didn't that, Layla? Because you and I were almost always the only people there. But that worked out really well. But what we found, what I found during the very first session, was that this particular subject was head and shoulders above everyone in the class. And now, like, we've got two of the people who were, and Louise and Layla were both at that first class. Now, two of those people have gone through with me from the very beginning and are still here with me. And then I have a new person who's extremely quick and bright in this classical astrology stuff, and really picking it up. And if you have watched last week's video, so that's the other thing. Those of you who are not with me this week, I really highly recommend you go and watch last week's video first. There are some principles in it that I think will make this work just a little bit better. So last week we talked about just the regular significations of the moon as a planet, the traditional significations for the moon as a planet. That's all we did, as we have done with all of the other 6 planets. Right, so I've got a series or a playlist that's called The Planets, and it's the blah 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 in traditional astrology, Venus in traditional astrology, Mercury in traditional astrology, etc., right? Okay, so that's what we did last week, and we learned some really interesting things about the moon. And I'm going to come into that just a little bit later. This week, what I want to talk about is, as I was studying for this course or preparing this class of or this series, and especially the traditional astrology series, which we started to do after I did this very first one, what I did was I was reading Benatti, reading all of these different things, and I was seeing how Benatti didn't make any distinction between natal astrology and horary astrology and electional astrology and mundane astrology, or didn't make any distinction between the moon or the planets, but specifically the moon. And I did. You know, I looked at the natal moon differently than I looked at the horary moon. I love horary. I've been reading horary for years and years. Love the use of the moon, the usage of the moon in horary, but I never used the moon in horary the way that I used it in natal. I never, and vice versa. So all of a sudden I'm seeing that Benatti is saying, hey, this goes for this goes for natal, this goes for electional, this goes for horary, and it's all the same. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, in horary, the moon says yay or nay to the whole damn thing. Nothing can work at all. The moon is the co-significator of the question, and nothing works at all if the moon isn't working. So can we say that about the natal chart? Is he implying that about the natal chart? That's our question for today. So this is not so much a teaching session. I mean, partly it is a teaching session, but this is theory. This is a theoretical session where we explore my question, which is, how much effect does the moon really have in natal? I mean, we know in an electional chart, in an electional chart, the first thing you want to do is fortify the moon. The next thing you want to do is fortify the significator for what it is that you want, and the significator for yourself. Same thing. Well, in horary, we know that if the moon is impeded, that more than likely means shit ain't gonna happen. If the moon's not applying to the thing that you're asking about, that more than likely means that this stuff is not going to happen. The moon has a decisive effect on the chart, a decisive and global effect on the chart. And so I'm thinking, we've been thinking of the moon as emotions, and and I was thinking obviously it was more than that, because I've been studying classical, but I hadn't been thinking of it really as of the same importance as the moon in horary or electional, where it has this decisive ability to make the entire chart work or not work, or to contribute, rather, maybe not to make it work, but to contribute to its success or failure. So I'm going to just bring out a few different points from the 146 considerations of Bonatti, and to kind of show you what we're talking about. And as you all know, I really rather hate modern astrology. And one of the things that and one of the reasons is because I consider it to be an anthropocentric art. So it's a mind or person-centered art. And the astrology that I study and the astrology that we represent here is a geocentric art. And so this statement up here with the star next to it really encapsulates how the ancients believed astrology actually worked. And this is the difference between us and them, so to speak. This is the difference between those of us who study traditional astrology and those who study modern Western astrology. The astrologer must consider judgments, and judgments are about accidents. Now, we know when we talk about the word accident, we're talking about an happening or an event, right, or a circumstance, right, which are impressed in inferior things from the motions of superior bodies and from their qualities on account of their effects in them. Now, that sounds like 100% gobbledygook, right? But within the statement is how people believed astrology worked, because what they believed was that superior bodies, in other words, the celestial bodies like planets, like the planets and the fixed stars, they worked themselves, they worked on us. And which reminds me of the term graha, which is a Sanskrit word that is used for the planets. And graha means seize, to seize or grab. So it means a seizer, it's the grabber or seizer. And so what happens is when we go through situations in our life, through accidents of our life, we are gripped or seized by the graha. And we are seized by the graha and forced to do their will. Right? So when I have a major illness and I just happen to be in the dasha or, in a major period of the Lord of the Sixth, then the Lord of the Sixth has grabbed me and has seized me and is bending me to his will or their will. Okay, so that's the superior body that they're talking about here. We are the inferior things. So now, judgments are about accidents, events, happenstances, happenings, which are impressed on inferior things, on us, from the motions of the superior bodies, the planets, and from their qualities. Their qualities are Venus is goddess of love and marriage, Jupiter is expansion, or rather Jupiter is wealth, Mars is contention or courage, on account of their effects in them. Right? So that's what that means, right? It sounds like complete nonsense. What? I mean, it sounds like old language that is indecipherable, but it's not. And within that indecipherable sentence or paragraph is the concept as subtext, as above, so below. So that ultimately what happens is that when we look at a natal chart, what we're looking at is how does the natal chart constellate the life events? How do the life events constellate in a way that reflects the natal chart? Because as above, so below. So Mars-Saturn opposition is Columbine High School, a mass shooting. That's how Mars-Saturn can constellate. Opposition can constellate. Okay, Venus trine, Venus moon sextile is cooking wonderful food and beautiful smells and decorating a lovely home. That's how that constellates. Right, so that's what we're talking about. So at the very beginning, we're talking about how the astrologers believed that things happen. Things happened because superior bodies that are up there in the sky have their own natures, and they get involved in these different areas, or these different not different areas, but certainly different areas of life, right, via the houses, but also in these different relationships with each other, and those things constellate events for you, for us. Excuse me. Okay, so I hope that's clarified. Any questions about that before we go on? Because this is so important that we understand this particular part. Once again, I mean, and we're going to look at charts and everything, but really, if you're looking for the information about, but what does the moon mean if it's blah, 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 then you're looking for the other video, right? We'll get into that a little bit later, but really when you're looking for what are the actual significations of the moon, then you're looking for the video that precedes this one. So to kind of continue on with this particular point, right? I've picked out two or three considerations that show once again that, or rather that reinforce once again this idea. The first consideration of those things which move a man to pose a question. There are three things that move a man to pose a question, or a person to move a question. The first is the motion of the soul, right? And we know that these people believe that the soul is made up of the moon and Mercury. So don't forget that. When someone is moved by his intention to pose a question. The second is the motion of the superior bodies. This is why I included this. Namely, when someone asks what they are impressing into the questioned thing, what will come of it? Right? So the belief was, and still is actually, that when we've got a pressing question, you know, when you've got something on your mind and it just won't leave your mind, and, you know, it's rolling around in your mind. There's the moon. Remember, moon are thoughts. That's what we learned last week, that the sun is the soul and the moon are your thoughts. Right. And so think of the circular nature of thoughts. Think of the cyclical nature of thoughts, how we can go back to thinking about the same thing over and over again. Right. And obsessive thinking is circular thinking. Right. So the third is, so when we're talking about, namely, when someone is asking what they're impressing into the questioned thing, they're saying that the actual planets themselves and the constellatory pattern in the sky is saying, hey, ask that question. Because not only am I going to show you what's going on, I'm going to give you the answer to it. Then the third is the motion of the free will, which can itself be an act of the one asking, because even though the soul is moved to ask, it does not suffice unless the superior bodies lead him to pose the question. There we are. Nor does the motion of the stars suffice unless from the motion of the free will, the act of asking is reached. So there has to be what Jung would call participation mystique. There has to be a participation between the heavens and the person, right? The heavens are going to act on the person by weighing it heavily on your mind. Then the person is going to come. Now, once again, we're talking about, you're like, okay, wait, what does this have to do with the moon? The moon is one of these superior bodies. We're looking at how the moon works in this context, or within this format that I'm talking about, in this framework. Right? That there are superior bodies that work on inferior bodies like us. The third consideration is to see in how many ways the planets may operate in inferior things on account of the diversity of the qualities of the aforesaid motions. So once again, I'm just reinforcing this. And there are 16 ways by which occur the diversities of operating, and the affecting of all things which come to be and are perfected. Now, within this particular sentence here, lies also a major important difference between modern Western astrology and classical astrology of both types, Jyotish and classical Western. Both types are really preoccupied with this concept of perfection. And perfection basically can be described as whether or not a matter will be successfully completed. Okay, so perfection is whether or not a matter can successfully complete itself. And so if a planet is impeded or things that so basically they're saying that the planets have 16 ways in which they can affect the ability to perfect a situation. Now, we talked about this in detail in the 146 considerations videos. So if you're interested in this, if you're not kind of, already turned off the video, or if you're not like your head swimming, but you're still going to give it a few more minutes. And if you're like, wait, what does he mean by these 16 ways? What are these 16 ways that it can happen? Then I say go back to the Bonatti 146 consideration, especially maybe number 3 and 4 and 5, because there we go and we do it with chart examples and everything. There we go right into exactly what these 16 ways are and what they mean and how to recognize them. Right? So what this third consideration is saying is that there's 16 ways that the superior bodies or celestial planet or the celestial realm or planets of the celestial realm can affect us. And they can either affect us for good or ill. Now, the fourth consideration, now we're kind of coming to it, is of the causes of things. So these are the actual 16. So the fourth consideration involves the actual 16, but we're only going to show you number 16. The fourth consideration is of the causes of things helping matters so that they come to be and are perfected, and those which prohibit matters so that they do not come to be, nor are they perfected. And what are the causes destroying matters after they were perfected? And what are the causes destroying matters after they were perfected, which often happens? And they come to be in 16 ways, okay? So the 16 diverse motions are the 16 ways. And number 16 is, looky there, the 16th is the condition of the moon, which they call Kamalu ul-Kamar, which is an evil condition and the corruption of the moon, just as the ancient sages said. So what I thought I would do today is we would look at this 16th consideration, because the 16th condition actually is the entire 5th consideration. But before that, I thought I would come to the crucial information, in my opinion. And once again, I preceded it with a quote, or actually it's not a quote, but it's actually the end of the previous segment. But I will tell you in the end about the consideration or chapters which principally pertain to at first glance at judgments. Right? What was the very first thing that we saw? Hey, the astrologer has to make judgments. So now he's saying, okay, hey, I'm going to now talk to you about what you principally are going to look at the very first thing when it comes to making judgments, of which the first is the 9th consideration. And it is that that the moon has a similarity with inferior generated things. He's talking about us. Now, remember, the moon is the mediatrix, and she's the closest to us. And she's got pieces of earth in her. She's got a magnetic pull on the earth and in the waters of the earth, but then she's also got parts of the earth in her as well. As a matter of fact, I meant to use a quote from a comment that I saw that I thought was really germane to this. It was a comment on the post on the moon in traditional astrology that was posted on Reddit that someone wrote, and I thought it was so perceptive. So that's what he's saying, that the moon has a similarity. Remember, we're 70% water, right? The moon rules the waters. The moon has a similarity with inferior generated things. okay, is the first thing it's saying. And this happens to her because of her own effects, which she has in all terrestrial things, and from the frequent revolutions, the which revolutions she makes about the elements and around things made from elements, right? Everything on earth is made from the four elements. We are all made from the four elements, or the five elements, if we're talking Hindu and Vedic astrology, Hindu and Vedic wisdom, right? So she has effects on all terrestrial things. Terrestrial means earthly. And she has the frequent revolutions, right? She's the fastest planet, so she goes around the fastest. We're going to skip this other thing about the circles, but there was a belief that each planet operated in a circle, and each other planet kind of there were larger circles. So the moon was within Mercury's circle, which was within Venus's circle, which was within the sun, etc., etc. Where you see that the moon at the new moon appears small, slender, and little, then her light is increased. And it seems that she grows little by little until her whole body is illuminated from the side we see, and she is in the fullness of her light. Then her light is decreased little by little and step by step until it goes down to nothing. So do bodies act, both rational and non-rational, and all vegetable things. So this is continuing on with this metaphor or simile. This is really more of a simile. For see how men are born. They are increased and grow until they are perfected in their determinate size, and then they are decreased and begin likewise to decline. And they decline until their life is finished, and so do the rest of things. So this is why I included this. Because what they're basically saying is, of all of the planets, the moon is the one that's the most like us. And the moon is the fastest. She makes the fastest revolution. She is the one that does the most interacting with the earth, its atmosphere, and all of the elements. And she's the one that goes through all of the elements the fastest. She's the most like us. She has the most effect. And then this is the really major point that we're coming to. And if anything, this is what we are testing. This is the theory we are testing. Whence the moon is always to be put as a significatrix of every matter, of every beginning. He's referring to electional astrology. Of every nativity, he's referring to natal astrology. And her good condition is the good condition of every matter. And her bad condition is the bad condition of every matter. This is what we are trying to see if there is credence in. If we can find credence in this statement. And it is her virtue alone and only her power that even if the Lord of the Ascendant or another significator of some matter were impeded indeed, so that it could not do or perfect what it ought, and she were found to be strong, nevertheless the matter will be perfected. That's the basic rule of engagement for horary astrology. That's basically horary 101. There you go, Layla. There's your horary 101. For she is the governess of all matters. That means that what we should really be doing, wait, let me finish this and then I'll say it. And is the bearer of the virtues of all the planets towards planets. She bears the virtue of all planets to all of the other planets, is what they're saying, namely one to the other. Indeed, she receives the disposition of one planet and carries it away to another. Now, I did not include, there's a little part that's left where he makes a distinction about that, and I'm not going to include that for now. However, so take that in. This is what we're looking at. This is what we're looking at. This is what we want to know. So based on what this is saying, that means if when a person asks on Reddit, can I get pregnant? Or what's my love life like? We need to be looking not just at Venus and the moon, Venus and the ruler of the seventh, but we also need to be looking at the moon. Someone says, will I get better? I've been dealing with chronic illness. We need to look at the moon as well as the ruler of the sixth and the ruler of the first and all of the other things that represent illness. And my husband and I ever going to be in the same place at the same time? We need to look at the moon, as well as the ruler of the seventh and the ruler of Venus and all of that other stuff, is what this is implying. I mean, I'm just trying to make a point. I'm just trying to make sure it hits home. But so that's why this is, and so this is what hit me a year and a half ago, or almost a year and a half ago, and got me so interested, in doing this session, because I was like, wait a minute, I've been looking at the moon wrong. You know, even though I felt like I was looking at it more extensively than most other Western astrologers, I still found that I was looking at it incorrectly, because this is saying she's the co-ruler of everything, every matter, every nativity, every beginning, everything. Okay, so I just can't stress that enough. Any questions? Because of course we're going to come to charts, so we can save it until we look at it. I thought I'd bring this back so we would just be able to see it. So once again, the 16th cause of perfection or lack of perfection or prohibition is this kamalu il-kamar, is this corruption of the moon, right? So it's basically when the moon is impeded. So note that the thing that's really interesting is that 4 gives us the 16 ways in which things can either be perfected or prohibited. And number 16 leads us to an entire consideration, which gives us the 17 ways in which the moon can be impeded. The moon has an entire consideration all herself. That's number 5. And then number 6 is how all the other planets can be impeded. So even from this, we get to see how important the moon is, right? She gets her own consideration with 17 ways of her own, right? 17 ways of her own. Then all of the other 6 planets get a 6th consideration. This is all hers. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go back over these so that we can kind of have them in mind. Because when we look at a chart, when we look at the charts, we're going to want to see some of these things. We're going to be wanting to kind of be looking for some of these things, because, well, when we get to the chart, we'll talk a little bit more about it, because like, once again, like I'd love for this, especially I'm glad that I have the 2 of you here, or 3 of you here kind of with me, because I'm very open to this being a discussion and not necessarily a teaching session, because once again, this is theory. So that, and also, I'm doing a certain amount of speculating, I'm doing a certain amount of experimentation. And so I want you to be in that same place mentally with me. And that means I want your questions, and I want your, what makes you curious about this as well. So feel free to come on in whenever you want to. So the first way in which the moon can be detrimented or corrupted is she's combust. Right? So that makes perfect sense. The second way is she's in her own detriment or fall, or she's aspecting a planet in their detriment or fall, or she's aspecting a planet in her detriment or fall. Now get that. She's either in her own detriment or fall, she's aspecting a planet in their detriment or fall, or she's aspecting a planet in her detriment or fall. Okay. The third is when she is in combust degrees. Now, the combust degrees are the degrees opposing the sun, right? So the worst, the worst ones are the 12 degrees, which are before the degree that is directly opposite the degree in which the sun is. Right, so 12 degrees before the opposition, 12 degrees before the full moon. That's why any planet that's opposing the sun is not generally considered to be in good condition, including the moon, even though she's at her fullest state. The fourth is when she is joined to one of the malefics, right? So in the course, when she's conjunct the sun, she's combust. And then if she's either by corporal conjunction, opposition, or square to the malefics without perfect reception, right? We've been talking obviously about reception. Then so then that will be an impediment. The fifth is when she's with either the head or the tail of the dragon, Rahu or Ketu, and within 12 degrees especially. Sixth, when she is in Gemini, because Gemini is the 12th sign from her domicile. That was new to me. Seventh is when she's in the end of signs because they're in the bounds of the malefics. And of course, we know that the 30th degree is a critical weak degree, right? So, but this, we also know that from the essential dignity table that the malefics, almost invariably, the malefics are the owners of the last few degrees of any sign. The eighth is when she is in the 6th, 8th, 9th, or 12th from the ascendant. The 9th house, why would that be, huh? I wonder if Gemini is also amplifying the changeability of the moon with Mercury as the ruler. Oh, I love that. I think absolutely. I think absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Although I'll be honest with you, I don't think it needs to be. I think that Cancer is just as changeable. That's something that, see, because remember, the moon's natural signification is changeability. And so we tend to think, oh, the moon's in Cancer, that's good. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things I'm going to show today. I'm going to put up a chart of somebody with moon in Cancer who can't get their shit together. And it seems like it should be so wonderful. It should be so useful. But the whole kind of changeability, but remember, changeability is the moon. And so the moon in Cancer, that also highlights her changeability. It just gives her more power to transmit. I think that's what we're really talking about. After a year and a half of thinking on this subject, there's the issue of change that the moon represents, but then there's the also the issue of transmittance, right? And so when the moon is, would we say that when the moon's in Scorpio or in Scorpio or Capricorn that she's able to transmit less well? Excuse me. And when she's in Cancer or Taurus, that she's at her apex of ability to transmit, possibly. So the 9th is when she's in, so I asked why the 9th? Excuse me. I gotta stop eating before this. I'm almost positive. All this sneezing is because I just ate. And I had cheese, and so all the sneezing and I'm never gonna stop eating cheese. Anyway, the 8th is when she's in the 6th, 8th, and 12th, which makes perfect sense. But the 9th is the opposite from her joy, and so that's why he included the 9th. The 9th is when she is from the 15th degree of Libra to the 15th degree of Scorpio. You know that this whole via combusta thing, Robert Zoller didn't, and Robert Hand, neither of those guys thought that this was worthy any longer of consideration. Especially because, of course, it's in a different place now, right? It's all moved. And the 10th is when she is void in course, namely joined to none of the planets by body or by aspect. Oh, hey, remember, this comes back to your question, Shanice. Or she is uncivilized or feral. Remember, we talked about this too, which happens when she is void in course and is in a place in which she has no dignity. Now, that's different from some of the other things we've seen when we've looked at wildness or being feral. But I find that to be quite interesting. There's the other idea of feral is when she's not necessarily void in course can also mean often, as I mentioned, usually you're void in course after you've finished everything and you have nothing else to do. But you can be void in course completely in a sign where you're not going to make any aspects. And usually that's called feral or wild. Then the moon is in a feral condition, feral or wild condition, uncivilized condition. And so in this particular case, they're all, Bonatti is also adding that they would also be in a sign where they have no dignity. So it'd be like the moon in Aquarius making no aspects to anything for the entire time she's in it. So that would be an example of feral based on this definition. The 11th is when she is slow in course, but then she is likened to a retrograde planet. As I mentioned in the Benani 146, I have not really looked at slowness and fastness in course. I know people who do, and they do think it's important. The 12th is when she is the failure of her light. This is at the end of her course. So this is at the end of her waning course, so that nothing or very little of her can be seen while going to combustion, which happens at the end of a lunar month. We're actually going to look at a chart that has this. And Anne-Louise might have this, if I'm not mistaken. Anne-Louise, your moon, I think, is applying to the sun within a few degrees. And so this would be a similar thing. So we know that this, right? You're right. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. So we know, so these are things to be looking at. Remember, once again, we're looking at how does what we're talking about right now end up affecting the entire chart, every single situation in the chart, right? And over the past few weeks, you've been hearing me spitballing and speculating about what I think it means. So this is the end of our materials. We're going to go to a chart in a second. And then the rest of it are all essentially the kind of degrees that we find them in. And if you remember, I'm not going to go into this today, azimuth degrees, well, smoky, dark, all of that stuff. That is contained in the traditional astrology course, A New Look at the Zodiac. And it also might be, and I also did a shortened version of A New Look at the Zodiac, which may also include that stuff. But it definitely is included in the traditional astrology course version. So definitely, if you're interested in that, be sure to check that out there. Okay, so the first person I want to come to is, as you all know, and you may also be sick of, but I don't know. I mean, the reason I use it is because I'm so intimately aware of so many of these people's biographies. And this chart really, this person made so much sense. It's not just that I love opera and love opera singers and want to introduce you to all these fucking opera singers, but this person fits the bill so well. Because Franco Corelli, I was listening to myself talk about, I was listening to myself do the predictive course where we talked about Leontine Price and we talked about Billie Holiday. And by the way, Leontine Price, we talked about the day of her Met debut. Well, the day of her Met debut was the day of Franco Corelli's Met debut. They made their debuts on the exact same day. Franco Corelli is considered one of the absolute great tenors, great operatic Italian tenors of the 20th century. One of the greatest voices, a tall, gorgeous man, highly charismatic stage presence, amazing voice with amazing high notes, just everything you could want in a tenor, everything you could want in an opera singer, everything you could want, almost everything, and you could want in a tenor especially, except there was one problem. Franco Corelli had debilitating stage fright. Franco, I'm going to read. I'm going to read something to you. So I'm just going to read something to you. He had debilitating stage fright to such an extent that he ended up retiring early from the stage. He could not get comfortable. He had to have his wife there. We're going to talk about all of this in a second. Zinka found Corelli, they're talking about soprano Zinka Milanov. Zinka found Corelli to be shy and withdrawn to the point of aloofness. He could not conquer his great nervousness, and always he had on his face such a melancholy expression. He never smiled. The first night when we finished the last bow, he just walked away without saying one word. Later, I found out he didn't mean to be unfriendly. He was really very nice. He just didn't know what to say. When I was leaving the theater, I saw him coming towards me with the same unhappy expression. I thought he will tell me something unpleasant, that he is very displeased about something, so I braced myself for it. No. So that's one thing that somebody that worked with him said about him. There were just all of these interesting things where they talked about how difficult it was for him to actually do his job, and how he would come off of stage and he would be a nervous wreck, and his wife had to wait in the wings, etc. I'm going to read one more thing. Okay. The performances of Chenier were pretty wild, though. Corelli was at the peak of his form, but he had the worst stage fright I'd ever seen. He would show up for rehearsal and sing beautifully. Then all of a sudden, he'd throw up his hands and say he was in a terrible voice and couldn't go on. Singing seemed to be agony for him. And once the run began, I started to see why he was such a wreck. At his intermission, his wife, Loretta, would barricade herself in his dressing room and scream at him, telling everything he'd done wrong. She didn't shut up even when they were on stage. It got so that I would try to avoid going on extremes left or right, no matter what the blocking called for, because Signora Corelli was always in the wings yelling at her husband in Italian, and I'd have to concentrate like crazy to stay on track. So now you see why I chose this chart. I chose this chart because this person wanted to be a musician, wanted to be a singer, This person wanted to sing, loved music, loved to sing, but had this nervous condition that ruined it for him. Right? Ruined it for him. So one of the first things one of the cool things that, because I've been looking through all these different charts today, or yesterday and today, been thinking about, been thinking about the details of their life, and really having to extract what isn't the moon from what is. And so one of the things that I found was really useful for me was to, in order to keep it really just about the moon, was to look at the profile of the planets who were the triplicity rulers of the element of the sign that the moon occupied. So in this particular case, we're talking about Aries, right? Both the moon and sun are in Aries. So this person has the 12th situation. This Franco Corelli's moon is in a failure of light. It's both combust and in a failure of light. Right? And so I also remember, Layla and Anne Louise, at that very first session, that the person that I was working with made light of somebody in the course and what was going on with their own moon, which was very like this, but in Leo. And I remember saying to them, I said, hey, you got to be more sensitive, because this moon is really, really, I forget what I said, but I think I might have said under siege, but there was something I basically said that, this moon is really trouble. This is, this person is dealing with could be dealing with constant doubt. This person could be dealing with constant malaise, because remember, the moon is happiness and joy, right? So this person could be dealing with an inability to feel joy. This person could be dealing with what's going on with this person's moon could be affecting everything. It was, right? It was affecting everything, right? And we found that out. And so in this particular chart, this person can't enjoy his fame. He's one of the most beloved singers of the entire century. He couldn't enjoy his fame. He couldn't enjoy his adulation. He couldn't enjoy being in front of everybody else. He couldn't get over. And look at how interesting it is. So we've got this moon in Aries with the sun, who's the ruler of the seventh. There's the wife, the castigating wife. Right? Note that the wife is the strong one in this chart, right? The moon isn't strong, the wife is the strong. So the moon is kind of weak the moon is already weakened by the sun. Remember also that the sun is fame, the sun is recognition, the sun is kingdom, and and there is no more solar archetype in opera than the operatic tenor, especially the Italian tenor. So the solar archetype, there has to be strong sun stuff going on in a tenor's chart. As far as I'm concerned, it just has to be happening, because it's the essence of the solar masculine principle, that virile, like it's the vocal Adonis, and it's exalted to, it has more power than moon to operate the way it wants. Yes, indeed. Well, the moon doesn't have any power to operate, right? All she can do is squint, right? That's all she can really do here in this chart. She's squinting. She's squinting at the light, and she's trying to hold herself off from the heat, right? It's the excessive light and heat of the sun is burning her out. Prince William's is the same also. Okay, that's interesting. And seventh house. Well, that'd be interesting. See how that works for the marriage. Maybe the marriage was arranged. William is, wait, which one is William? Is William the one with Megan, or is he the one with Kate?
He's the older one. He's the older one. The blonde one.
He's the one with Kate. Yeah, so that was an arranged marriage. So you can see that there. Right. So he was the one that acquiesced to the arranged marriage. They were the ones that didn't. The Meghan Markle and the other. But okay, so we can see, so this is kind of my point. This person couldn't enjoy any of the great gifts that he had. What do they say? What does she say? He would be rehearsing and sounding amazing. He was at his peak form. He was rehearsing at his peak form, and he couldn't even enjoy it then. He was rehearsing. He wasn't even in front of anybody. So constant doubt, constant, and also, right, stage fright. What is the negative of Mars? Lack of courage, right? Mars is courage. Aries, moon is in Aries. Lack of courage. Note also these things are with K2. What do we, you know how I'm always harping on this idea of K2 and disillusionment, how K2 doesn't want you to enjoy yourself because he wants you to turn away from it. Right, and so K2 is the only one that's really on the cusp of the third. The other two planets are in the second. They're not of the second, but they're in it, right? So I mean, so that this is what was important for me, because I mean, we can look at different things that show us different things. I mean, we can also see how the ruler of the ascendant, Saturn, is in Virgo, right? Virgo is one of the signs of beautiful voice. Mercury, which is the universal significator for the voice, is in the second house of the voice. The ruler of the ascendant is with the second house, the ruler of the second house of the voice. They're both in Virgo, which, as I said, is a sign of attractive voice, and Mercury is there. But look, there's that opposition, this opposing. So even there's a reticence between the Mercury and the Saturn. So even then, and also note that it's a mute sign on the second. Now, we've seen mute signs on the second cusp for Billie Holiday. We've seen it for Leontyne Price. So we know we've seen Pisces on the cusp. Remember, Billie Holiday, Leontyne Price, and Franco Corelli all have Aquarius risings. Matter of fact, Franco Corelli's ascendant is on Leontyne Price's sun. Right? And so they both made their debuts on the exact same day. And they both have this second house with a Pisces second house cusp. But if you remember, Leontyne has Venus and Mercury and Jupiter there. He's only got Mercury, right? Who's in fall there, right? So he's even got a fallen planet there. So this is what I kind of had. This is kind of what I was going to all of these other things to kind of show myself, but I was like, wait. We don't want to be looking at the Saturn Mercury. Yes, it is a contributing factor, but that's not what we're talking about. The Saturn Mercury is a contributing factor showing a reticence, certainly. You know, showing a receptivity, but also a reticence. But what we're really talking about is this uncontrollable stage fright. That's the eighth house. The Mercury is the ruler of the eighth house. Saturn is on the cusp of the eighth house. So now I'm going to do what I was saying. I'm going to look at the planets who are the three triplicity rulers for the fire element, because the moon is in a fire sign. It's nighttime, so the first triplicity ruler is Jupiter, who is the ruler of the second house, and who is the ruler of the 11th house, 11th and 10th in this chart. Makes sense. Then the next one is the sun, who is combusting the moon, right? And remember, the sun is the ruler of the seventh house. This man traveled with his wife all the time. What did Eileen Farrell say? I didn't even want to go to that part of the stage because the bitch was screaming at him from the stage, from the wings. Screaming at him from the wings. There it is. Aries is the loud noises. Then the third triplicity ruler is Saturn himself on the cusp of the 8th house, with the separating aspect to the ruler of the 8th. So there's the fear. The ruler of the 8th and the 2nd. And here, two aspects of the fear: the ruler of the 8th and the 2nd, and then this whole thing with the moon. Right? So this moon can't handle it. This moon can't handle the pressure. This moon can't handle the criticism. This moon can't find this is it. And I'm gonna ask you, Anne Louise, at your worst, can this be a problem? At your worst, do you have a problem finding an objective way to look at things? This man.
Yeah. At the exact moment, I would say I see myself as reasonable, but when I'm after I've got it all figured, when I get it a bit processed, I can see I'm not very objective sometimes when I get too emotional. No.
Okay, so that would be.
If that makes any sense.
Yes, it does, very much. So, and notice that she actually added a codicil, when I get too emotional, right? Because the moon is the emotions, the mental emotional. It's how the mind affects the emotions. It's how the mind governs the emotions, right? Because it's our thinking that governs our emotions. The moon is our thoughts, and it's our thinking that governs our emotions. Right. And so if we're thinking about this guy he couldn't objectively even see his own talent. What did she say? He'd be rehearsing and throw up his hands and say, I sound like shit. And he'd be sounding like God. That's the moon. That's what we're talking about. Right. So that's different from the 8th. That's different from all of the other things that we're seeing in here that show us, that kind of show us what we're, that support what I'm talking about, right? Because always we're looking for more than one indicator, right? But in this particular case, we're trying to isolate one indicator. So here's the thing, this insecurity, because remember, one of the things we learned about the moon last week is that the moon is a codependent. The moon's stability is dependent on relationship. When the moon is not in a relationship to another planet, she is in a state of lack of mooring. She is unmoored. And the worst aspect of her changeability can happen. So my feeling is that, the point that I'm making in this is that the insecurity and lack of mooring attracted him to an overbearing wife of this nature who would take over to this extent and contribute to the terrorization under the guise of help and assistance. That a person like this would not be able to find themselves comfortable ever with many things, with most things, and would have a very difficult time being objective, seeing things objectively. And we know now yours is in Leo and Louise, his is in Aries. So this person might also rashly act in certain ways. Might rashly act out in certain ways. And sure enough, they talked about another time where his cue came up and he just sauntered on after almost 2 minutes because he wasn't finished arguing with his wife.
Can I say something?
Sure, of course.
I don't know if if his new moon is that if it's an eclipse or something, but I saw I watched a podcast with Steve Judd, and he explained the moodiness with the eclipse people or people, the eclipse babies, and the moodiness through adolescence and their life,
I
just
wouldn't be
not self.
surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Look at how close they are to K2. So this might very well be an eclipse. This
Yeah,
might,
yeah.
and it could be a solar eclipse even, so it might, I mean, I didn't look to see that, but that's a very good point, right? Because obviously eclipses are an aspect of what we're talking about. And that's when that's when the shadow planets either subsume or devour the lights. And so that usually happens either at full or new. So that's a very good point. That's a very, very good possibility, but I did not look to see if that was the case. But looking at the chart, it very much looks like it is.
Okay.
Within 15, it might need to be within 12. But look, the sun's within 10. That's my point. The sun's within 10. So there's something going on. And also there was an eclipse. We had that major solar eclipse at the end of 2021. And if I'm not mistaken, like K2 wasn't even in the same sign. It was being eclipsed by K2, but it wasn't even in the same sign. So it's very possible. Okay, so that's Franco Corelli, someone who had an illustrious career, highly, highly loved. I was just turned Venus hour at the exact moment I said highly loved and revered. One of the greatest tenors ever. Absolutely, no question. One of the greatest in opera of all time. And could not enjoy a fucking second of it. That's important to me. The next person I want to look at is Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was a famous poet, and this is another person. This is a person who chased after suicide for her entire short life. I think she killed herself in 1964. Thanks. I think she killed herself in 1964, 1960. She was like 32, maybe maximum. And this person, so interesting, this woman. She overwhelming mental illness and 63, thank you. Overwhelming mental illness and depression, overwhelming depression and mental illness. As a matter of fact, she's famous for a book called The Bell Jar and other poems. And the poems are harrowing and disturbing. Just kind of everything about kind of the Sylvia Plath thing is just very, very, in a way, kind of outsizedly horrific. There's a horrific aspect to the whole Sylvia Plath profile, especially as far as her mind. And unfortunately, she had a child, and she involved the child in a lot of this stuff too. And they think that she abused the child in some very strange ways. This person was extremely mentally ill, extremely talented, extremely mentally ill, and extremely influenced by depression to the extent that, like I said, she was chasing down death. So the first thing, of course, we see another Aquarius rising chart. And I wanted to make a point about Aquarius rising, even though it's not necessarily germane to this topic. Aquarius rising is a difficult ascendant because Saturn becomes the ruler of the 1st and the 12th of the self-undoing. So it becomes the first of who you are, and the 12th of your self-undoing. So it can be a difficult position. And then look also here how we have the moon in the 8th house of fear and horror and death. The moon's in the 8th house of death. This woman was fascinated with death. Fascinated with death. And then note also that Venus is in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is applying to Venus. So we've got a rider here. We've got an aesthetic. We've got an aesthetic of sorts here. Right, in the last chart, we had kind of blind running. That's what that felt like in that last chart. Blindly running away from something, or blindly trying to escape. This chart feels different. This chart, one, feels like a love affair with death, right? Because of the moon in Libra in the 8th, but also it's a preoccupation. It's like a fantasy. The ruler of the 11th, the ruler of the 11th in this chart is also Saturn. But note that the ruler of the 11th is very close to is also the ruler of the 12th and the 1st, right? And close to the 12th. So this whole thing with what is it I'm fantasizing about? And Jupiter's in Virgo, right? Jupiter is the will to live, the enjoyment of life. Venus and Jupiter are the enjoyment of life. Both of them are in Virgo, right? And Jupiter is with, Venus is with Jupiter in Virgo, right? So Venus is pleasure, right? That's the first thing. Venus is pleasure. Look, also Venus is with Jupiter at K2. Disillusionment. Venus can't enjoy. Disillusionment with K2. Jupiter can't get full pleasure out of the situation. Note how the moon is the ruler of the 5th house of pleasure. Second triplicity ruler of this is daytime would be Mars in Leo. Ooh, okay. That Mars, of course, is, how did she kill herself? She put her head in an oven. Mars is heat in a fire sign. She put her head in the oven. Right? So in this particular case, when I look at the triplicity rulers, we see Saturn, who's the ruler of the ascendant, but also ruler of the 12th, and the part of fortune is in the 12th, and the ruler of the 11th. So we can see that Saturn is really affecting all the dreams. It's affecting the good dreams going forward. So it's what maybe helped to propel her into being published, a published author, but it's also affecting the pipe dreams and the dreams that we shouldn't be, and the nightmares that we shouldn't be focusing on. Then Saturn is already, as I mentioned, or as has been mentioned before, Saturn is the natural significator for death and for the 8th house. Wouldn't Saturn here be a functional benefic? Not necessarily. I mean, because he's the ruler of the 11th in his own sign, he could be, but remember, this is a published author. He could be both. This also means that he, even though he's strong and strongly working for the 11th house, it means that he's strong and can make the 12th house strong. Right? He rules the 12th and the 11th. The 12th is the self-undoing. So that means that anybody that's connected to Saturn is connected to the ruler of the 11th and the 12th, like Venus, who's applying to the trine of Saturn. Right? And Venus is the poetry, the Venus in Virgo and with the Mercury, right? So the Mercury is applying to the Venus is applying to the Saturn. So more power to self-undo. That's exactly right. And also note that Venus and Saturn are the 2 rulers of Libra. So we've got this Venus-Saturn trine ruling the moon. And Venus is the domicile ruler, and Saturn is the exaltation and triplicity ruler. So ultimately, Saturn it might be stronger. He might actually be stronger. He might even have the term. I think he's got the first 7 degrees of Libra, so it might be somebody else. But but either way, Saturn has very, very strong influence. And as I mentioned, he rules the 11th and the 12th and the 1st. Now, mind you, if we looked at this from a whole side standpoint, he does not rule this. He doesn't rule the 11th. He rules only the 1st and the 12th. And he would be in the 12th. So even there, we've got an 11-12 overlay. So from a whole sign standpoint, Venus would be in the 8th. Venus, Jupiter, K2, Neptune would all be in the 8th. Moon would now be in the 9th. So that moves her away from the 9th and takes that away. But it now moves Venus into the 8th, aspecting the ruler of the 12th, who's in the 12th. And then it makes the ruler of the 12th in the 12th. Right? So this is how it can be both, right? By Alcabish's houses, we've got the ruler of the 11th and the 11th, and there's the public author being able to make their dreams come true. And then if we look at it from a whole sign, then we've got the ruler of the 12th and the 12th. and we have the ruler of the first and the 12th. And that's not good, because that inclines the person to isolate themselves, to make them, of course, you need that for it to be an author, right? That inclines them to depression, right? Saturn is depression, pessimism, inability to communicate, not wanting to be around people, right? So all of that stuff. So Saturn is the first triplicity ruler. Mercury is the second triplicity ruler of the moon, applying to the sextile of Venus, right? So this gives the eloquence and the eloquence and the poetic eloquence. And then the Jupiter is the last one. And so the Jupiter is the ruler of the, what do we have for him? He's got the 10th. Of course, that makes sense too, right? Because the Venus is with the ruler of the 10th, and certainly she's known for being an author, of poetry especially. So we can see from the triplicity rulers of the moon what the moon is kind of thinking about, or what the moon is kind of bringing in. And I'm going to show you two people that aren't famous. I'm going to switch for a second to look at two people who aren't famous. So I have two charts of two friends of mine, or actually one of them is still a friend, one of them is no longer. And both of these guys, they're both gay men. They both are dealing with sex addiction, and neither of them have been able to. Well, neither of them, at least, especially. I'm going to start with this one first. This one has gone into a basically their mind kind of got broken during an illness, and as a result, they became irascible and difficult to deal with, blaming everybody for all of their ills, obsessed with financial security, and status, even though they're not bringing any money in of any kind. The person can't work. The person can't get along with people. The person is highly volatile and reactive. The person makes very bad decisions. And engages in high risk behavior. And when I was living with them, they engaged in a high risk behavior that almost killed them. So I thought that this would be an interesting chart to look at for a person whose life isn't working. It's a person whose life isn't working, whose life is completely platformed. They're not. I mean, as far as I know, they're maybe living in the backyard of one of their siblings' homes. You know, they've got, and they're always spouting pipe dreams about what they will do or could do, or how much money they need to have, or blah blah blah, or whatever. No sense of what's the word I'm looking for? No sense of objectivity. Either vastly underestimates or greatly overestimates their ability, throws themselves into weird projects that they underestimate the ability to complete. So there's so many interesting things here. This person, so this is kind of a wrecked mentality. This person has wrecked their mental health is wrecked. This person's mental health is wrecked. And so I thought if we looked at it from the lunar set. Now, this was the chart where I realized that I needed to kind of separate things out, because this person's also a nonstop talker. But that's a Mercury thing, right? Mercury rules the tongue and whatever. So I was like, oh no, that's Mercury. But all of these other things that I mentioned, I think we can talk about, we can give to the moon, right? The impulse to do the high risk things. This person's also highly sensitive, so they're always they're always like having people adjust things for them, or they're always controlling other people's movements, like, can you not walk through that way, instead can you walk through that way, like always adjusting other people's movements in order to make themselves more comfortable. So all of that really fits with Cancer rising, certainly, which I call the human weather vane, or the weather vane of the zodiac, right? Because it's picking up because essentially it's picking up everything. And so this is the idea of the moon as transmitter. It's picking up everything. And so it has no filter. It has no filter. It can't change the channel when it's picking up on everything. And so he's kind of like that in a sensory way, where he's very easily triggered, very easily overwhelmed, very easily goes into a rage, very, all of that stuff. So like a baby, so in an infantile state. So essentially in an infantilized state. So I'm gonna invite you all to come off the thing and tell me what we're looking at. What is it that you think we're looking at that speaks to those things? Certainly the fact that Mars is in Aries, yes?
Yeah. I think we can also say that the moon is trining Mars, although it's a separating aspect.
Yes, very good. And that it's the ruler of the moon.
Yeah.
Right. So there was nature pushed. As a matter of fact, look at that whole system with Mars. It's Jupiter, Neptune, Mars. That is a culprit of a lot of problems in this chart. And I'm trying to see the planets, but I can only see that partile conjunction with Chiron screaming, ha! And feel free to say something about it if you want. You all know that I don't use it, but I'm not averse. If you've got something intelligent to say about it, or if you got something intelligent to say about it, feel free to go ahead. But I will say that it's that, and you're right, and it's exact within 14 minutes or something like that. What would you say about that, Shanice?
I know that Chiron in Aries vaguely has to do with like a sense of identity, and there's a wound that has to do with that. But like, since taking the traditional astrology course that you put on, I've been really trying to like ignore asteroids and focus on visible planets and use those things as just like affirming to what can already be seen in the chart. But I'm still staring. I'll chime back in.
No problem. Fantastic. And so here's the thing, that kind of language, that's the language everybody uses with Chiron. And so that's my problem, is that I always get exactly that language. What I want is something, so I'm not saying, and actually I was on with Major. I think you might have been in that room where I was on with Major, and he had some very interesting things to say about Chiron. And I was like, ooh, wow, this is lovely. So it's not like I'm saying fuck Chiron. I say fuck Chiron personally because I don't use it, I don't give a shit. But the moon is right here on it. So, we can say, oh, yes, and it is with Chiron, but we don't need to, because what we've got is this Jupiter, Neptune, Mars thing. First of all, always remember that Mars and Jupiter are enemies.
Yeah.
Right? They're enemies. And that's really important, because they don't want to be helping each other. They don't really want to help each other. They don't really, when they're together, they don't really want to help each other. It's really my way or the highway. And although Jupiter is more helpful to Mars than Mars is to Jupiter, right? Because now Mars is conjuncting a benefic. But Jupiter can just make the Martian things bigger, right? Because that's what Jupiter does. He enlarges. Note that Mars is the ruler of the fifth house. Note that Mars is the second ruler of the water triplicity. It's daytime, which means he represents for the fifth house sensual pleasure. Note that Mars is with Jupiter. This is a sexual addict this is a sex addict who has done many, many high-risk sexual behaviors, including the last one that I mentioned, on which he almost died. So, and I remember when we were talking, one of the things he said was, I don't make good decisions. You know that the 10th house is your decisions, right? Because it's your karma, it's karma, it's actions, or Jyotish, it's praxis. So the 10th house is praxis. So it's really when you're looking for the kind of decisions that you make, then you're looking at the 10th house. And so he was like, I don't make good decisions. Look who's the ruler of the 10th, this Mars. And the ruler of this moon.
You want to have a question?
Dad, would he be projecting his Chiron to his moon? I'm just thinking out loud.
What does that mean?
He, all his childhood's traumas and whatnot, would he project him over in in his emotional state?
That's a good, that's interesting. And I love that you asked it like that, because he was completely obsessed with all of his childhood traumas and the grudges, that he had, that he was holding against. I mean, basically, we're talking about someone who couldn't get along with anybody, but who blamed everybody for the reason that he couldn't get along with them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
We're talking about a malignant narcissist. Leila, what were you going to say? What were you asking?
This may be a reach, I don't know, but was Moon's last aspect with would like in this chart would be with Venus?
No, Jupiter.
Jupiter last aspect wouldn't
Two Sag. Okay,
yeah, right.
No, Mars is at 5 Sag. So
so the last
one
is Mars.
Yeah.
Last aspect is Mars.
Before Mars,
I thought she meant before Mars. Yeah, but it would be Jupiter before Mars. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I was obviously reaching, because I thought I ignored that Jupiter, and I thought it would be that the Moon was squaring Venus before it entered Aries, and that she was translating light to Mars. So I ignored the Jupiter.
No, but the Jupiter. But here's the thing. We see the risk taking with the Venus. See, with all of those planets, they're all in Sagittarius.
Yeah.
They're all, so this is, someone loves to kind of go off and do the forbidden and all that kind of stuff. But and so the Venus already and spend a lot of time doing doing hunter type sex, doing cruising and anonymous sex cruising.
Yeah.
So even the hunt.
Yeah, and the Venus is in its joy. It's in the 5th house.
Yes, exactly. Or really, is it? Or is it? Because I think it's on the cusp of the 6th.
Yeah, it's on the cusp of the 6th. Yeah.
So it's in the 6th. It's on 24. So no, it's in the. So we would consider that in the 6th house. So even though, and also looked at the cusp of the 5th is Scorpio.
Yeah.
Right. So the cusp of the 6th is Sagittarius and Venus is there. So we know that this person can come to grief. I mean, we're expanding this whole thing now because we're talking about other things, but we know that this person can come to grief based on their on Venusian things. Right. That Venus can bring the person into a bad place, right? Because Venus is in the 6th of bad fortune.
And Antoine, I was just wondering, okay, so I remember from one of your classes, separations from benefics the residue is hope. Separations from malefics, the residue is fear. So I see like that, you mentioned that this person is always talking about what they're going to do and so on and so forth. That separation from Jupiter, and Jupiter like in a strong position, being in its own term and its own sign, like very strong hope for the future. But then after, was this person very anxious as well with that separation with Mars, or would Mars be would have left because the Moon is in Mars's sign?
Do you mean did they experience anxiety generally?
Anxiety, yeah. Like what a separation from a malefic rule, the residue is fear, you had mentioned before.
Yes. I would say yes. I would say definitely. I would say that it was anxiety and resentment.
Okay. So maybe another residue might be like a anger kind of.
Anger. There was more of a residue of anger and rebellion. When I met him, he had even. So when I met him when we were in when he was in his early 20s, I was in my late 20s. And he had even one of the most important events in his life was getting into a fist fight with his father. So that kind of thing, so even there's the separation from Mars, even in that respect. I think so. Yeah, there was a lot of resentment. There was a lot of resentment and anger. There was a lot of there was less of kind of him being the victim, the perennial victim, until later. So this is somebody that started out as a very close friends, and now we are no longer friends. And so because I had this chart, and because this was an example of a life that wasn't working on any level. This was a person that was also in a 13-year relationship. In a 13-year relationship, got married. Actually, they ended up with another man, ended up getting married to that same person, and then within a year of the marriage, they ended up getting divorced. But the relationship was highly dysfunctional as well. So
Jupiter square, not Jupiter, Saturn square the sun, or sun square Saturn. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And
in the seventh house. Yeah.
And the Mercury, right? So if it's whole sign, the Mercury's in the seventh, and the Mercury's leaving, or the trine, the Mercury's leaving it. But so so the seventh house ruler and the sun, exactly. All of that stuff, and then of course the Venus in the sixth, right? So when we look at the triplicity rulers for the moon, we see its daytime, so the sun, and note that the sun is the ruler of the second. This person's obsessed with money, obsessed with talking about money, and also comes from a well-to-do family, but has nothing. Comes from a well-to-do family, has nothing of his own, and is obsessed with, Kim Kardashian and, all obsessed with people doing well and having business. This person has had businesses of their own. See, most of the downfall happened. Oh, and I wanted to kind of show you something interesting. But most of the downfall happened for this person after 35, maybe after 40, after 35 or 40, around 2009. This person was born. So after 35, this person was born in 1971. So as far as the marriage life is concerned, it didn't work. As far as money and whatever, this person has no money. As far as work, this person cannot hold a job, and even says things like, "Oh, I could never work for anyone else because when I moved in with them, this person was waking up at like 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The husband was doing all of the work. It's like this is a follow ruler. Yes, right. So the detriment ruler of the second, the husband was carrying him. So the ruler of the second and the seventh, the other person, the other person is holding your money, so to speak. And then also the square between. Oh, and then there was always a square between at the same time. Now this is the worst thing. At the same time, and this is an expression of this Sun Saturn. At the same time that the husband was supporting him, he was always castigating the husband for his poverty consciousness and working for a wage instead of having a business. So there was that kind of thing as well. So he was always talking about his husband's poverty consciousness and how he, could never, but of course he never did anything to kind of help with the situation. Or rather, like I said, after this certain time when the mental state was broken, he hasn't done anything. So I just thought I would bring this chart to our attention as an example of, once again, we're looking at how the moon can affect everything, right? How the moon can be the co-ruler of everything, which means that the local determination of the moon also affects the local determination of every other planet and the houses that they represent. So if I were looking at this chart as an example for marriage, right, I would obviously look at this Sun-Saturn square. But then I would also look at this moon separating from Mars, right? I would also look at that, because that would give it, and sure enough, there was lots of, of course, when you're in a gay relationship, you've got the opportunity to kind of make a different idea or create a new paradigm around what monogamy looks like, if it's going to be a part of the relationship at all, what sex looks like. You have that opportunity. Try to figure out what energy in the chart he could have used to prevent it from devolving so completely. But instead, it turned into lies and infidelity, and bringing home STDs, and to the relationship not being sexual at all, right? And so there's the aridness of Saturn, the coldness, the aridness of Saturn, the non-sexual marriage as well. Right, so we would see that, but then we would also see this moon separating from the Mars, Jupiter, Neptune thing, and we'd say, this person really wants the stability, but it doesn't look like they can really sustain it in a way that is constructive or consistent. Right? Doesn't that look like the problem with this chart based on the moon? The problem with this chart is that they can't control their impulses. They can't control their senses. They can't control their impulses. They can't be relied on to come through outside of that experience. This person is so tied to this Jupiter, Mars, Neptune conjunction. It's so tied to that it can't really do anything else. And so this is where I say that Neptune is a really malefic planet. Thinking in answer to your question that you just brought up, what would maybe have helped him to come out of this, or what could have? Yeah. So any ideas, Shanice? What you would have said? What we would have maybe pointed to?
I honestly don't know. It's so sad. So the square with Saturn and the Sun. In that case, the Sun would be pushing nature. Pushing nature towards Saturn. Would he need to, I guess, tap into that Saturn for more stability? In terms of long-term goals, the maybe prioritizing, I guess you could say, some of his healthy prioritization of some of his relationships with the Sun. So like learning how to work with that square that is applying. Yes. Learning how to work with that square.
I think so. I also, because Mercury is the ruler of the part of fortune, I focused a lot when I used to read for this person when we were still friends. I focused a lot on the separating trine with Saturn, because that was this person's ability to take a course on how to create a business plan. That was the person who created a business plan for this thing that he and the husband were supposed to go in together, and the husband reneged on it, and he's held resentment for years. Like that was the person who could create a plan, who could kind of bring all of their forces in together and create a plan. Right. So that was, in my opinion, that was kind of what that was about. That was what I was pointing to. Like I said, especially since Mercury was the ruler of the part of fortune, and in the whole sign 7th. So in an angle whole sign.
Because when I'm like, if I look at this from a whole sign perspective, then the Sun would be in the 8th house, North Node, also in the 8th house. So his money is heavily dictated by his partner's money.
That's right.
And if he had shown more reverence for his partner's money, then his life might not have this his ego getting into the way of him wanting to be the one that's the prize. The moon would have been in the 10th house in that case, but it's separating from Jupiter, separating from Mars. Like you're not there anymore. You're not the priority.
Right. You're not fabulous. What's interesting is this guy was also a drag queen, and calls everybody queen, of course, which we know is the term for the moon. And so he calls everybody queen, like people who just meet, everyone. Oh, hey, queen. Like that's like his general greeting. And very, very, very obsessed with being in the public eye, being known with celebrities, a lot of the usual kind of gay stuff. But so this is an interesting chart. So so this is a chart of someone. Now, like I said, they didn't start this way. When I met them, there were seeds of this. That I saw, but like I said, after that illness, there's a break in the mental condition that has created a full platforming of the mental health. And so that's where we are, and thus has affected every aspect of life. So that's what we're looking at in the chart. And so, that's a Debbie Downer person. That person's a Debbie Downer. Is another person I've known for a very long time. So I've known this person a little bit longer than I've known the other one, and we are still friends. And this one is the charming, annoying ne'er-do-well. Comes from a relatively well-to-do family. We're neighbors. He and I come from adjacent neighborhoods. He comes from a wealthier neighborhood than mine. So he comes from an upper middle class family, Never really ever been able to hold a job down, ever, really fully hold a job down. Has been living on disability for years, for probably the past 20 years, maybe going on, yeah, past maybe 15 to 20 years at least, has been living on disability. Another sex addict, but the thing interesting about this chart that I wanted to bring is that this person has the best disposition, always happy, always laughing. Right now, this person is living in a horse trailer in rural North Carolina. His house burned down. His house just burned down. This guy's very eccentric. All he cares about is his goats and animals. He's living in a horse trailer. This is a person who is highly intelligent, but can barely make themselves understood, talks in circles, complexifies everything. This is a person who is really lovable, is really quite lovable, but uses it and takes advantage of it to and leeches, a little bit of a leech, kind of like the other person. So the reason I put this chart up is that Moon's in Cancer. This person actually is doing relatively well. He's not doing so well financially right now, but you know, like I said, he couldn't hold a job down for very well. But he experienced his strongest period of financial stability when he became a caregiver for his parents. So there, the Moon is the caregiver, right? We learned that last week. So when he became a caregiver for his parents, and he found a financial stability that he had never experienced before. And then when they died, he inherited quite a bit as well, or not. I don't know that it's super amount, because of course, you know, people are dying older and older and using more and more of their estate. But he did inherit, and so he himself doesn't really have that much money. He's never really had very much money. He's never, like I said, been able to really carry a job down. He's very much been the kind of person who, what's the word, is led by the senses, and especially led by his dick. So what are we looking at here? Why is this person able to be happy and joking in the midst of their adversity, and the other person is a Debbie Downer who no one can stand to be around? Yeah, anybody? And especially when this person has Mars square Saturn, Moon square Mars. Did you notice that? Moon is applying to the square Mars. Is it earlier? Actually, though, the first thing it's going to do is apply to the sextile of Sun. So that's the first thing it's going to do first. But the interesting thing about that for me is that he and his father did not get along, right? Sun and Saturn are in sextile. That usually would mean that the ruler of the fourth and ruler of the first are in sextile. That would usually mean that the father and the son get along well. Let's look to see what's the ruler of the first triplicity ruler. It's Jupiter. What's going on with the Jupiter? Where's Jupiter? Jupiter
is in Capricorn. It's fallen.
More of an opposition. So it'd be an opposition. It'd fallen, and there would be an opposition relationship between the sun and the Mercury and the Jupiter. I mean, Moon and the Jupiter. And Saturn's there too. So I think that gives us a much clearer picture, doesn't it?
Saturn's retrograde.
And the Saturn is, and it's nighttime, so Saturn becomes the significator for his father.
Yeah.
So even though Sun is the ruler of the fourth, Saturn becomes the universal significator. And we know that the Moon, so the Moon is in his own sign, applying to the square of Mars, applying to the sextile of the Sun. And he has always lived rural and farmed. So there's the fourth house. Yeah. He's raising animals now, right? So he's living in he's always cultivated the land and lived with animals, lived with domestic animals. This person's a hoarder.
Okay.
Now, would you think that looking at this moon in the second in Cancer?
I think so, because it's in its domicile and, it has more power.
So it would want to substantiate?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't think, I mean, this person is a major, I mean, hoarding is a sign of mental illness. Like, he's been a major hoarder since we met in his late 20s.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we're talking, I remember when I came to visit him in Florida, when he was living in Florida, and he hadn't, of course, he never would get around to it. He hadn't gotten around to cleaning. And so, he had cats everywhere. So he had all these full cat boxes in the bathroom.
Oh.
In the bathroom, right? So like these full cat boxes full of cat shit in the bathroom, stuff everywhere. And this is the kind of person who has 3 of everything and none of them work.
Okay, yeah. So the Venus is the ruler of the 12th, and it's applying a sextile to Mars. And the Mars
and Venus and Mars are both triplicity rulers of the moon.
Yeah.
And so is the moon. So it's Venus, moon, and Mars. Now, that's a good point. So Venus is the ruler of the 12th, and she's applying to the Mars. And so is the moon applying to the Mars. Now, who's the ruler of the part of? Oh, notice how the Venus is on the part of fortune. So there we've got the sex. So there's the sex addict thing working out. We've got the ruler of the 5th and that's right. The ruler of the 1st is actually Mercury. I forgot that. So look, that we've got the ruler of the 1st and the 5th.
Makes sense.
Right.
I know that you're not a fan of like trying to use the outers to delineate, but that Neptune trine, seeing things clearly. So it's like I'm okay with this. Everything's great. It's fine. But I don't see my suffering 6 months.
I wonder, to be honest, I did look at that Neptune, because in a lot of ways that explains so much. He can't stay organized. He can't organize his thoughts. He can't organize his speech. He can't. I was talking about a woman I'm working with on Clubhouse. All of us. So before I ever started working with astrology, I was a tarot reader. I started studying a tarot in 1989 with this author named Eileen Connolly. And this person, he and I started working with her at the exact same time. And this woman, Marlene, that I'm working with on Clubhouse, she had been working with Eileen for 6 years before that. And so we all kind of come from the same esoteric tradition, working with tarot and numerology and Kabbalah. And so at that time, he and I were the brilliant students in that group. And he was always like considered to be, really, really smart, but was always kind of annoying because he couldn't really communicate clearly. He couldn't really, like, once again, he would complexify things. He would talk in circles. He would bring in, allusions to things that weren't necessarily germane. All of that kind of thing. All of that is very lunar, right? The Mercury is linear. The moon is lunar. And see here, we've got this very strong Mercury. It's 1 degree away from the exaltation degree of Mercury, of Virgo. Right? So we've got a native intelligence that's strong, both the moon in its own sign and Mercury in its own sign in exaltation. We've got a strong native intelligence. What we don't have, on some level, is a connection between them that makes what they're doing come out makes their value come out in a clear way. And I think that maybe that's Moon Neptune is the culprit, because it's the closest aspect the moon is making. So even though you're right, I don't tend to prefer to look at these other things, these outer planets. I don't really see anything that, oh, wait a second, and see, and Pluto's even closer. The sextile to Pluto's even closer. Yeah, I don't see anything as far as like a sextile to the sun. I can't imagine that would necessarily be problematic in the same way.
The Venus is also squaring Neptune.
Yes, it is. The Venus is squaring Neptune. But we're looking for, but remember, we don't want to look at everything, right? What we're trying to do is we're trying to really figure out what our theory is, or trying to prove or disprove our theory. Now, the Venus makes sense. The Venus is an important factor because she's one of the triplicity rulers of the moon. If she weren't, I would say, hey, no, we're not dealing with her. However, she is, because she's the second triplicity ruler. The first triplicity ruler is Mars.
Hmm.
Right? And there's that square between Mars and the moon. So now we know that Mars can act in a bunch of ways. He can act as contentious and rebellious. He can act as rash and unthinking. And it's interesting. So we had the moon Mars trine with my other friend. Now we've got this moon Mars square with this friend, and that was separating with this one. This one's applying. And the interesting thing is he can get angry. He's not an angry type at all, but he can certainly lose his temper and get angry. But he's, like I said, an extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? Jovial. He's extremely jovial. Why?
The Mercury applying a trine to Jupiter.
Okay. Also, Jupiter is one of the rulers of Cancer. But can this Jupiter be jovial?
Yeah, it can be because it's fallen and it's with Saturn.
So you say it can be jovial, meaning Jupiterian. So even though it's fallen, it can be itself?
Yeah, but it would have more Saturnian influence on it.
But is Saturn about fun and laughter?
No, it's not.
Yeah, so that's my point. Why is this person so good humored and fun to be around and lovable and jovial and happy?
Mercury in Virgo.
Yeah.
Mercury in Virgo.
Yeah. I think it's both the Mercury Virgo and the moon in Cancer.
Yeah.
Right.
And moon in Cancer in the square with the Mars. You said that the nature of squares is like two people in a fight, each for their own, like I can't remember what you said exactly. Vying for like leadership or whatever, for power.
Yeah, they're both vying for the same position.
And moon is going to win because it's in domicile, and Mars is in detriment. So
good point. So the moon is pushing power.
Yeah.
Pushing power. So sure enough, so we've been looking at pushing nature, but now we have an example of pushing power. The moon is pushing power onto Mars. Mars rules what houses?
Mars rules. It's intercepted between 11.
So 6 and 11.
Yeah.
So Mars is in Libra. This person contracted HIV. Venereal disease. Well, it's not a venereal disease, but you catch it usually sexually, right? So this person caught HIV. This person is HIV positive and caught it as a result of sexual activity. And so there's Mars as ruler of the sixth, Scorpio, the genitals. Mars is in Libra, which is a Venus sign. Okay, so we have that. So 6 and then 11. Yeah, so good spirit, right? Remember, the 11th is called the good spirit. And Mars is in Libra, which is the opposite of its own sign. If Mars were in Aries, maybe if this were a Dexter square, right, where Mars were in Aries and Moon were in Cancer, so if the Moon were aspecting Mars from the right, then this person might be more irascible and argumentative, yes? But in Libra, Mars is not going to act like that. Matter of fact, my best friend in San Francisco, I was just talking to him, Scorpio rising, Mars in Libra. He's going through some shit right now because he's working with somebody who's a fucker, who's a piece of shit, and who wants to fight and who loves to fight. And he's been trying to find every way he can to avoid conflict. Mars in Libra. Right? Libra avoids conflict. Mars is the conflict. So in this particular case, this person doesn't want to crash bottles and crash bottles and ruin the party. This person wants to keep the party going. And sure enough, this person is always the last person to leave a party. So I thought these two charts might be interesting to look at. They're just regular people. I know them intimately. I know at this particular point in this person's life, he's in what I would also call kind of a platform state, even though he's still totally happy, calls up, joking, laughing, making jokes. This is a very, very eccentric person, this guy. So where's that? And not like gay fabulous, right? The other one was gay fabulous. This one's just eccentric.
Eccentric. Okay. The midheaven and Aquarius.
But would that be enough? Look at Saturn's in Capricorn, though.
But Saturn is retrograde with a fallen Jupiter.
Maybe so. But now, wait a minute. So what are we looking at when we're looking to find the person we're talking about?
Ascendant ruler.
And?
The moon.
And? You're not going to get that one. But
no.
You'll be like, oh, of course, the ruler of the part of fortune. So those three, right? So that means that unless Saturn is involved with it, that's not really talking about him.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is my point. And also, like a certain sign on a cusp, that'll never be enough, right? Because signs don't tell us anything except how a planet is operating, right? So really, we're always looking for planets and planetary relationships. I think that see, that's the other reason I think that this moon Neptune is involved. This person's very eccentric, a little bit weird, good looking, really handsome, really attractive guy, kind of sexy, attractive, but mentally kind of weird. But fun to be around, loves to party, loves to enjoy themselves, loves to party, loves a good laugh, loves a good joke. Just, it can be stimulating and fun to deal with, to hang out with. The other one too, but this one, but very different thing. Like I said, the other one now has burned all their bridges and everyone hates them. This one, not so much. So that's where I'm gonna stop today. I'm gonna keep the share up if you want to talk more about the chart. Okay. So I'm gonna reiterate what I said, because I think it got to the heart of what we're talking about, and I'm not gonna go into any major details. But we were just talking about each person's moon in this in the room right now, and I was talking about how that means that's what you will take into every other area of your life. So, for instance, Layla Akbar was talking about having a moon, Mercury, Mars. And so I used the fifth house of children as an example. I said, okay, so that means that you're bringing that into the fifth house of children, so that when you're a mother, you might have to not be so sharp with your tongue because Mars is sharp, right? And it can be assertive. Or you might just be the kind of stern mom who's very loving, right? So moon is with Mercury and Mars. So this is going to be a very verbal mother, but might be kind of assertive. And at the same time also might be might be just a little stern, right? Because the Mars is there. So this might not be the squishiest of mothers. That might not have anything to do with how much they love them. So once again, you can apply the lunar profile and how it manifests in your life, especially if you're in touch with that. We had a few more things, but I'll even just talk about mine for a second. So I've got this Mercury Jupiter opposition with the moon trining and sextiling both of them. And it's separating, but it's still involved in it. It's in Aries, and it's a trining Mercury and sextiling Jupiter. And so that this kind of, there can be a scatteredness to my to that stuff. The Jupiter is retrograde as well, and in Gemini. So there can be a scatteredness to me that the moon can reflect. So but there's also a loquaciousness, an articulateness, a quick-wittedness, hopefully, I'd like to think, that comes with it as well. And so those are the things that I would bring to my places, right? And so for the good or ill. And so, the exercise for those of you who are watching is, in my opinion, to looking at what we just looked at, understanding what's going on with the moon, the local determination, what sign it's in, what house it's in, what house it rules, what aspects it makes. All of those things together give the full profile of the moon, which then gives full profile to what you're experiencing inside you, right? So one of the things I experienced inside me as a result of moon in Aries is doing things too fast for my own good. Like speed is really not my friend, but I love it. Like I have to check myself. I often am feeling at my most powerful when I'm at my fastest, but that's when I'm most likely to make a mistake, walk on something stupid, walk into something stupid, not pay attention to something. But I am in my head, I'm invincible. But then right, then whatever just happened. So I've had to learn that when you get that feeling of, ooh, and it feels so good to going this fast, you're fucking it up. Don't do that. So be thinking about what aspect of my moon, how is it showing? How does my moon show up in me, right? That this is the perfect for all the modern astrologers, right? Because that's all everybody thinks about, right? Is how everything shows up in me. But the moon is for that. And the moon is for that because she's the co-ruler of everything in the chart. So what you would be doing is profiling your moon. My moon is with Mercury. My moon is trining Venus or sextiling Venus. My moon is trining Venus. That's a certain kind of moon. My moon is squaring Mars. That's a certain moon. My moon is conjuncting Saturn and Jupiter. My moon is, everybody's moon is doing something different, right? Everybody's moon is in a different sign. My moon's in Scorpio. Ooh, that says something. My moon's in Taurus. That says something too, right? My moon is making no aspects in the sign it's in. By the way, that was one of the things happening in Franco Corelli's chart. If we had gone back to that chart, and we still can, we would see that Franco Corelli, that the aspect to the sun is the only aspect that Franco Corelli's moon was making. I'm almost positive. Yes, so 0 Aries, I mean, not including the outers in this case, right? So I don't include them in the separations and separations and applications. I do include them in, you know, when they are involved, but I just don't include them in this particular way. So starting at 0 Aries, absolutely the moon would do nothing to no one, right? She wouldn't be aspecting the Mercury who's in Pisces or Jupiter and Saturn who are in Virgo. She would not be aspecting the Venus and the Mars in Taurus. So the only aspect that this moon makes in this chart is to the part of fortune, the ascendant, and the sun. But the only planet is the sun. So ultimately, this moon is feral. This is a feral moon. This is a wild moon. And she's not in a sign in which she has dignity, right? She has no dignity in Aries. She's applying, I mean, one could say luckily, but not really, right? Because in order to apply to the ruler of the exaltation of the sign, she's got to be combusted and lose light completely. So this is a debilitated moon. This is an impeded, a debilitated, and it's with the tail of the dragon. 2 impediments, 3 impediments. It's combust. It's combust. It's losing light. It's lacking light. It's what absence of light is what he called it. And then it's with the tail of the dragon. So that's 3 strikes. So we had somebody who was worried about their placement. Like this is a hell of a placement for the moon. So that gives us a better idea of what they're bringing into every area of life with them. I mean, think of the anxiety, right? Think of the anxiety that this person is bringing with them, and think of the headlessness, because remember, K2 is the tail. So where K2 is, we tend to act in a headless manner. So think of kind of the willy-nilly headlessness. Remember the example that I just gave of Franco Corelli, how he'd be singing and to everybody else it sounded fabulous, and he would just stop and say, oh, I sound like shit. Like that's headless. That's acting in a headless manner. So that's all of that stuff together. And this guy is bringing all of that into everything. Like Zinka Milanov said, I thought he was an asshole. You know, he always had such a horrible look on his face. He didn't seem to be getting any pleasure. I thought when he was coming up to me, I thought he was going to tell me what he didn't like. What he told her instead was that she was one of the greatest singers he'd ever heard. So, and she was like, oh, wow. She's like, I guess I learned his nature that way. But I mean, tell me about it. Like, so this is my point. So this is my point. And I guess it ended up proving my point. Or we ended up with a starting point from which to use this point, which is that wherever the moon is in the chart, and obviously I guess wherever the sun is too, and wherever the ruler of the ascendant, but really the moon, wherever the moon is in the chart, and I think it's once again because the moon is about going from place to place. That's one of the main things they talked about last week. Oh, she goes from place to place, moving from the vagabond. The moon is the vagabond of the chart. The moon is the vagabond of the chart. Now, the vagabond is not necessarily the homeless person, right? The tramp. I mean, the tramp is the vagabond. And it used to be that the tramp and the homeless person were all the same thing. Now we've got homeless encampments where people just live in one place, but they just don't have homes. But used to be that there were people that would, do the train lines, the tramps, and the vagabond and the tramp, and it used to be the thing of the stick with the bag on the end, which was the typical kind of vagabond tramp kind of symbol. And so that's the moon, is the vagabond that goes from place to place, meaning, in my opinion, or my speculation, is that she goes with you. She goes with you into every house. She becomes co-ruler of the house because she's also how you deal with everything, right? She's also how you deal with everything you come into contact with. And so some moons can handle certain things and not handle others, right? Think about one woman that goes to the bridal shop and is a bridezilla, and the other woman who isn't. It's the moon that makes the difference, in my opinion. Or it's obviously the entire chart, but the moon is one of the main things. And so the test, or the assignment, is to look at your own moon, figure out how it manifests in yourself, kind of in the way that we were just talking, and then to apply it to each house of the chart and see how it can affect each house for good and bad, because that's what it is doing. It's affecting each house as to its own particular nature by local determination, for good and or bad.